Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I thought I would chat with you guys and gals a little bit about progressive overload is more important than volume when you're not on drugs, if you're a natural lifter. But a quick reminder, if you guys will please click like down below, it'd be greatly appreciated. If you're not subscribed or following, please do so. And if you'll be kind enough to drop me a comment down below, I'd appreciate it so much. And let's get over to the topic. And I think that we have to understand this difference of understanding that when you really start looking even at science and the exercise science, most of this data you're seeing, if you really look at it for these ultra high volumes, is just swelling. It's temporary swelling, it's inflammation, it's water weight in the muscles, right? It's not necessarily true muscle fiber growth. And I think we have to make that distinction, because people will say, okay, but I got this really good pump and I trained this way with this really high volume, my muscles filled out, they have better glycogen storage. Yeah. And they very well might, and we're not disputing that. I think there is something to be said for muscle fullness and the way people are perceiving that muscle fullness, being a result of glycogen storage, intramuscular inflammation, intramuscular water. But you have to understand it's not new tissue growth, and it's temporary and fleeting. And that's the thing you'll notice with that sort of response. What happens if you quit doing it for 3 weeks, 4 weeks? It was like, I'm shrinking, I lost all my gains, I'm shrinking. No, you didn't. You went back to your real muscle growth. Your real muscle growth. And I think we have to understand that difference of the actual true myofibrillar muscle growth of new tissue being laid down is coming almost entirely, it pretty much is, from a product of progressive overload. And this is one of the things that's noted, and I've seen many researchers and even experts say, yeah, we do kind of note that. The guys who lift really, really heavy when they're leaner just have a certain denser look. There's a certain hardness you see to the muscles versus the pump guys. And I think what we're talking about here really is about that tissue growth. And you'll see people say, well, that's myofibrillar versus sarcoplasmic, but that's never been proven. Like, there's no real evidence of any of that. It's just new tissue. It's new muscle protein laying down. And I've seen people point that out. They're like, look at even some of these top bodybuilders in the past. The ones who train really heavy, they have a harder look, and the ones who just did larger amounts of pump volume have more of like a rounder, fuller look. Okay. And I think that's definitely something to think about and consider with that. Okay. And we're talking even Mr. Olympia level bodybuilders in the past. Was a difference that people saw. And I'm not necessarily talking about just bodybuilding here, because we're all trying to gain muscle. But I think that we need to understand that any of this other extraneous stuff, just like a lot of the size that people gain from drugs, if they're deflating quick, it's because they didn't gain muscle. It's a lot of intramuscular water. And it's the same a lot of times with your training and the pump work and the volume. It's not true muscle growth. True muscle growth is going to be way more solid, right? It's going to be a slight difference to the look of the musculature, even when dudes are not shredded. Just even at a reasonable body fat, you can see a difference in how hard someone looks who lifts heavy. There's just a difference to the muscles. And again, it's because it's real muscle growth. And I think that's something that when people talk about muscle maturity, that's really what they're talking about. It's just years under a heavy barbell, you just get harder and harder. And so things like the pump and the glycogen storage are transient. They can come and go, they'll fluctuate. That true muscle growth does not. That's very, very lasting, right? And the longer you've had it, the easier you keep it. Okay? So we have to understand that we're not talking about just looking at a certain swollen way or inflammation and some water weight. We're talking about actual muscle growth. So when we talk about gains, that is what we're talking about. Is it actual real tissue? All right, that comes from working the muscle harder, because why does our body gain muscle? Well, it's to prevent injury. It's when you continually subject a muscle to a harder and harder load. Your body responds because it's afraid you're going to tear the muscle. It's afraid you're going to get hurt. Okay, it's a defense mechanism against injury. And by that mechanical tension increasing in progression, I don't mean you have to necessarily just keep adding more weight to the bar. It's literally, can you do more reps? So in other words, Let's say, I don't know, your bench or your row or whatever, you can do 225 for 6, but you build it to 7. Well, that's progressive overload. You built to 8. That's more. What if you get to 12 or 13 reps? That's still progressive overload, and you're still going to get that response that we're talking about. Why? Because as more and more fibers get fatigued, your body's still having to continue to sustain a higher workload. Okay, so if you're able to do more reps in a set, you're seeing that people say, what about just more total sets? But no, because that's not doing the same thing. Okay, so what we're looking at is, are you subjecting that muscle to a more difficult stimulus? Not are you repeatedly hitting it with a slightly subpar stimulus. And it is about that fresh stimulus of when you're not fatigued. Okay, so in other words, you do too many sets and you're losing performance, you're not really recruiting upper threshold muscle fibers anymore. They stop recruiting. That's where most of your growth happens. So no, it's not about endless volume. It's because, again, now you're no longer stimulating the muscle fibers that you want. But if the volumes are at a level to where you can sustain performance over multiple sets, or even the duration of a workout, because let's say maybe you make the breaks longer so that you can keep training hard. Okay, that gets into some real long workouts, but they're still effective because you're still doing real work. So it really is about subjecting those deeper muscle fibers. And some people like to use it, but really what they are is the most fast twitch fibers, right? Those are the ones that have the most growth potential. Now, obviously, the amount you have varies from person to person genetically. I think we all understand this, right? We all understand this. So yes, some people are going to have more total potential there than others. But it is the faster twitch fibers. Those are those deeper fibers. And they're only really hit when you subject the muscle to a higher workload. So more tension gets to them. But that tension could be, hey, instead I've built up from 5 reps with 200 pounds to being able to do 12 reps with 200 pounds. Well, that's substantial. And that is more tension. And that will have a similar effect in terms of that to adding more weight. So it's still progressive overload. But if you're just like, oh man, I'm just adding more and more sets, but those later sets are weaker than your first sets, you're no longer really doing that. Okay, so you have to understand that difference. So when we are talking about progressive overload, we're talking about in the context of when you can actually utilize it. Otherwise, it's just getting more and more fatiguing without a true stimulus. So again, a point that gets lost on some people when they're chasing just pump volume, and they're like, well, I'm just going to keep doing sets. I'm going to keep doing all these pump sets, and it's still adding more volume and there's more workload. It's like, but it's not. You're no longer really getting to those muscle fibers. They're not being worked anymore. They're not being, utilized. They're not being actualized. It's not really happening. Instead, you're back over to just those slow twitch fibers just being beat into the ground over and over, and they're not really going to grow. Okay, if those fibers grew, marathon runners would be the most jacked people on the face of the earth, right? They would be crazy jacked. They would have Mr. Olympia level legs without drugs. But the reality is they don't. So the point is, what you end up getting there is just that continual pump. At a certain point, is just causing swelling, it's causing inflammation. And I thought it was fascinating. I saw at least one bit of research. And again, it's too short. These studies are too short to draw meaningful conclusions, but they make sense with what you observe in the real world, right? We observe this stuff all the time. The guys who do all the heavy amount of really high volumes, they might look good in full for a little bit, but if they back off on it, it disappears really, really fast. Well, it's because it's just like some of that data may be showing is that it's literally just inflammation. And at least I saw one study that showed when the volumes went crazy high, they lost muscle. So the intramuscular water continued to increase, but they lost muscle in one of them, or they stopped progressing completely because they're not really recovering session to session. And I think that's a factor with this too that you have to think about in terms of your training volumes. We could argue about training volume stimulating more growth, but if you're not recovering from it session to session, it's not really doing anything for you. And I'm not saying we shouldn't use high volumes. I'm not saying we shouldn't be able to increase volumes of work capacity. I'm not saying any of that. What I'm saying is if your performance is suffering workout to workout because you're not recovering from the volumes that you are doing, it is going to have a negative effect on your muscle growth. It will interfere with your gains. And I think this is a point that we have to address and we have to acknowledge in this conversation, right? We have to. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.